The Evora would regret killing Tom Allen. The humans would make damn sure of it. They'd show these murderous alien bastards the true meaning of hell. Lieutenant Robert Allen sat in the GFS Indomitable's mess hall, laughing with his fighter pilot squad mates. They shoveled down carbs, fueling up before their next mission. Robert, a tall, muscular man with short brown hair and intense blue eyes, cracked jokes as the 181st Fighter Wing bantered. The Hellraisers needed the levity. Tensions with the Evora Imperium were reaching a boiling point after months of border clashes and raids by the aggressive reptilian aliens. The Evora were testing the Galactic Federation's persistence, and the Hellraisers would be the tip of the spear in the response. Klaxons suddenly blared. The intercom barked, "Battle stations, all pilots to the hangar deck." Robert and his squad bolted up, sprinting for their F-61 Phantoms. In the hangar, the deck chief, a grizzled veteran called Sarge, shouted at them to move it. As Robert climbed into his cockpit, Sarge yanked him aside, his face grim. "Lieutenant, your brother's ship, the Dauntless, just went dark on patrol at the edge of Evora space. Looks like an ambush, I'm sorry." Robert's heart seized. His little brother Tom was a gunner on that corvette. Rage and dread flooded his veins with ice water. He'd find Tom, and if the Evora had killed him, God help them all. They had no idea the hell the humans would rain down on them. Robert's fighter shrieked out of the hangar into the starry black of space, engines howling. His targeting computer flickered to life, already selecting attack coordinates. Robert gripped the stick with white knuckles. "Hold on, Tom," he thought. "I'm coming for you. And if those Evora bastards hurt you, I'll make them pay. We'll show them what it means to kill a human. We'll show them hell." Robert's fighter screamed out of hyperspace, the Hellraisers right on his tail. The GFS Dauntless hung before them, a dead husk spinning slowly against the starry void. Scorch marks raked across its hull, its armor plating shredded and peeled back like the skin of a gutted animal. Gaping holes yawned where enemy fire had punctured straight through. Robert's heart jackhammered in his chest as he and Maverick guided their Phantoms into the Dauntless's ravaged hangar bay. They set down on the debris-strewn deck with a crunch of twisted metal. Maverick grabbed a pulse rifle from the cockpit's weapon rack. "I've got a bad feeling about this, Rob." Robert was already moving, sprinting for the ship's interior with his sidearm drawn. The corridors were dark, lit only by flickering emergency lights and arcing sparks from severed wiring. Bodies littered the floor, the Dauntless's crew ripped apart by savage claws and teeth. Blood painted the bulkheads in jagged swaths. The stench of death hung thick as Robert picked his way through the corpses, searching desperately for any sign of Tom. He found him in the gunner's nest, slumped over the controls of his shredded gun turret. "Tom!" Robert dropped to his knees beside his brother. Tom's chest had been torn open, his ribs cracked and splintered like a caved-in barrel. Blood bubbled from his lips as he weakly gripped Robert's hand. "It was a trap," Tom gasped, his words wet and halting. "The Evora, they took prisoners." His eyes went glassy and his head lolled back. The ragged remains of his chest stilled. No. Robert clutched his brother to him, sobs racking his shoulders. Grief and white-hot rage warred in his heart. Maverick's voice crackled over the comms, tinged with dread. "Rob, the Dauntless's black box is gone, so are a bunch of the escape pods. The Evora have them." A proximity alert blared through the channel. "Massive contact decloaking to starboard. It's a fucking dreadnought." Robert's head snapped up as a shadow fell across the Dauntless's ravaged hull. An Evora Apex-class warship shimmered into view, its jagged black flanks jam-packed with enough firepower to glass a planet. Energy surged along its plasma cannons as they swiveled to target the crippled human vessel. "Back to the fighters now!" Robert roared into his mic. He sprinted for his Phantom, boots pounding on the deck. Maverick was steps behind him as a screeching hum built in the dreadnought's guns. They threw themselves into their cockpits as the Evora ship opened fire. Demonic red plasma bolts ripped through the Dauntless, blasting it apart in gouts of flame and shrapnel. The shockwaves slammed into the Phantoms as they rocketed out of the disintegrating hangar. The dreadnought loomed before them, its hull pitted and scarred from centuries of battle. Swarms of missiles streaked from its launch bays as its point defense lasers swiveled to track the human fighters. Robert wrenched his stick to the side, sending his Phantom into a wild corkscrew. The Hellraisers scattered, afterburners flaring as they jinked and juked through the storm of incoming fire. Maverick stitched a line of tracers up the dreadnought's flank. "That armor's too thick. We need to target something vital." Robert's eyes darted over the ship's hull, his mind racing. The anger pulsing in his skull sharpened into an icy, lethal focus. There. The sensor arrays clustered on the ship's prow, and further back, the glowing nodes of its shield generators. "Maverick on me. Razors, lock missiles on those generators. I'll paint the sensors for you." Robert slammed his throttle forward, diving at the dreadnought's bow. Plasma bolts flashed past his canopy as he lined up his targeting reticle and squeezed the trigger. A stream of armor-piercing rounds stitched up the array tower, sparks and molten shards of metal spraying into space. "Fox 3!" Maverick called out, salvoing a volley of missiles at the damaged tower. They streaked in, slamming into the weakened supports in brilliant flashes of light. The array sheared away, spinning off into the void, trailing smoke and debris. "Sensors down," Robert crowed. "Hellraisers, now." The human fighters regrouped, lancing in at the shield generators. Their combined missile barrage hammered into the glowing nodes, overloading them in a chain of shattering explosions. The dreadnought's shields flickered and died. Bleeding atmosphere and trailing wreckage, the Evora warship wrenched into a lumbering turn and lumbered into a retreat. As it limped away, the Hellraisers rejoined formation, their ships battered but still flying. The adrenaline that had fueled Robert through the furious battle drained away, replaced by a cold, gnawing ache. Tom was gone, murdered by the Evora, and they had taken prisoners. For what dark purpose, he could only imagine. As he guided his Phantom back to the Indomitable, with the rest of the Hellraisers, Robert felt a searing oath take root in his heart. He would hunt down the Evora responsible for this atrocity. He would make them suffer as he suffered now. They would pay for what they had done. Tom would be avenged. The Evora would learn the true depths of human wrath. Robert would show them hell. The flight back to the Indomitable was a blur for Robert. He guided his Phantom into the hangar on autopilot, his mind numb with shock and grief. As he climbed out of the cockpit, his legs nearly buckled beneath him. Maverick caught him by the arm, his face etched with concern. "I've got you, brother," Maverick said quietly, helping Robert stand. "We'll get through this together." Robert nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He let Maverick guide him out of the hangar, the other Hellraisers falling in behind them in silent support. In the briefing room, Robert stood at attention, his eyes still red and raw. Admiral Petrov strode in, his bearing as rigid as the creases in his uniform. He fixed the Hellraisers with a somber gaze. "Lieutenant Allen, you have my deepest condolences for your loss," he said, his Russian accent thick with sympathy. "But I'm afraid we have no time to grieve. The Evora have just declared open war on the Federation." Shocked murmurs rippled through the pilots. Robert felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his gut. Petrov brought up a holomap of the border regions. Angry red icons flashed along the frontier. "They claim we violated their territory and attacked without provocation. A bald-faced lie, but one they're using as a pretext for a full-scale invasion. Our colonies are already under heavy assault." He zoomed the map in on a planet deep in Evora space, pulsing with menacing crimson light. "This is Zathras Prime, the heart of their war machine. Shipyards, factories, command centers, it's all there. If we can strike it hard and fast, we can cripple their ability to wage war." Petrov turned to Robert, his gaze hard as flint. "Lieutenant, I'm giving you command of the Hellraisers for this mission. You'll be escorting our bomber wing, punching a hole through their defenses so they can take out those key targets." Robert straightened, a cold fire kindling in his veins. "We'll get it done, sir, for Tom and for every human those scaly bastards have butchered." As the pilots filed out to prep their fighters, Maverick caught up to Robert. "I heard about the Reaper," he said, his voice low. "They say he's never lost a dogfight." Robert's mind focused. "Then I guess it's time someone brought him down to Earth. I'll blast that overgrown lizard out of the sky myself if I have to." Maverick clasped Robert's shoulder. "Give 'em hell, Razor Lead. We've got your back." Robert nodded grimly. The Evora had picked the wrong fight. They had no idea of the fury they had unleashed. The Hellraisers would show them what it meant to face human vengeance. They would burn Zathras Prime to ashes if they had to. The Evora would pay for every drop of blood they had spilled. Robert would make damn sure of that. In the hangar, the Hellraisers swarmed over their Phantoms, loading missiles and calibrating targeting systems. The deck crew scrambled to refuel and rearm the fighters, their faces grim with purpose. Robert pulled himself into his cockpit, his movements tight and controlled. As he settled into his seat, his gaze fell on the photo taped to his instrument panel. Him and Tom, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning in their flight suits. Robert touched the image, his fingers trembling. "I'll finish this, little brother," he whispered. "I'll make them pay, I swear it." The Hellraisers burst out of hyperspace, their engines roaring, to find Zathras Prime hanging before them like a malevolent jewel. The planet's surface was a mottled mix of greys and reds, its jagged mountains and sprawling industrial complexes visible even from orbit. A swarm of Evora fighters rose up to meet them, their hulls glinting in the harsh light of the system's star. Robert gripped his control stick as his radar screen filled with hostile contacts. "Look alive, Razors!" he barked into the comm. "We've got company!" The Evora ships were a fearsome sight, their angular silhouettes emblazoned with leering skull emblems and jagged alien script. They moved with a deadly grace, sliding into attack formation with the ease of a predator closing in for the kill. Robert wrenched his Phantom into a dive, his squad fanning out behind him. "Engaging!" He triggered his lasers, stitching a line of fire across the lead Evora fighter's shields. The alien ship jinked away, its wingman sliding in to cover its flank. All around him, the Hellraisers clashed with the Evora in a dizzying whirl of light and motion. Lasers and missiles crisscrossed the void as the human pilots fought to clear a path for the incoming bombers. "Stay tight on the bombers," Robert ordered, juking his fighter through a hail of enemy fire. "We need to get them to the surface." Maverick's voice crackled over the comm, taut with adrenaline. "Lead, I've got a new contact on my scope. Moving fast, coming in hot at 3 o'clock high." Robert's eyes flicked to his radar display. A lone blip was tearing through the melee, moving with a speed and agility that put the other Evora ships to shame. A cold fist of recognition clenched in his gut. It's him, the Reaper. The Evora ace was a blur of motion, his ship dancing through the battle like a lethal scalpel. His lasers scythed through the Federation formation, shredding fighters and bombers with ruthless precision. Robert hauled his Phantom into a tight turn, his vision graying out at the edges as he pulled a punishing amount of Gs. "Razors, stay on mission. I'll handle this bastard myself." He kicked his thrusters to full burn, rocketing after the Reaper in a snarling chase across the battlefield. The Evora pilot was good, anticipating Robert's moves and countering with preternatural skill. Laser blasts hammered at Robert's shields, warning alarms blaring in his cockpit as they drained to critical levels. Gritting his teeth, Robert rolled his fighter through a stomach-churning corkscrew, barely evading a barrage of enemy fire. The Reaper stayed right on his tail, his cannons spitting deadly energy. Ahead, a dense field of asteroids tumbled through space, the rocky debris ranging from the size of a fighter to small moons. Robert's eyes narrowed as a desperate plan took shape in his mind. "All right, you scaly bastard," he muttered. "Let's dance." He threw his Phantom into a screaming dive, plunging into the heart of the asteroid field with the Reaper in hot pursuit. The two ships slalomed through the floating rocks, their hulls scraping against jagged stone as they traded blistering volleys of laser fire. Robert jinked and juked, using the asteroids as cover, forcing the Reaper to match his moves or risk a collision. G-forces slammed him back in his seat as he pushed his ship to its limits and beyond. The Reaper doggedly hung on his tail, matching him turn for turn. But Robert could sense his foe growing frustrated, his shots becoming more erratic as the chase wore on. With a feral grin, Robert snap-rolled his Phantom around a massive spinning asteroid, cutting his thrusters at the last second. The Reaper overshot him, his momentum carrying him out of the cover of the rocks. Robert pounced, his targeting reticle flashing red as it locked onto the Reaper's exposed flank. He stabbed the trigger, sending a volley of missiles screaming towards the Evora ace. The first two slammed into the Reaper's shields, overloading them in a blinding flash. The third punched through, shearing off the enemy fighter's starboard wing in a gout of flame and shrapnel. Trailing smoke and plasma, the Reaper's ship spun out of control, slamming into a nearby asteroid in a brilliant burst of light. Robert let out a whoop of triumph as the fireball faded, leaving only a cloud of drifting debris. But his elation was short-lived. As he pulled his battered Phantom out of the asteroid field, his heart sank at the sight before him. The bombers were taking a pounding, their hulls riddled with scorch marks and gaping holes. Evora fire raked them from all sides as they struggled to reach the planet's surface. Robert swallowed hard as he took stock of his own squadron. Half of the Hellraisers were gone, their ships nothing more than expanding clouds of gas and wreckage. Those that remained flew on sheer guts and instinct, their fighters barely holding together. But they had a mission to finish. For Tom, for the Federation, for every human soul the Evora had stolen. Robert keyed his comm, his voice raw with exhaustion and grief, yet still ringing with defiance. "Razors, form up on me. We're not done yet. We push on to the bitter end, no matter the consequences. For Terra." The shattered remnants of his squadron fell in behind him as he plunged back into the fray, guns blazing. The odds were against them, the enemy numberless and implacable, but they would not falter, would not break. They were the Hellraisers. They would live up to their name even if it killed them. Zathras Prime would burn, or they would die trying. The Hellraisers fought on, lasers flashing, and missiles streaking as they slashed through the Evora's ranks. Robert gritted his teeth, his fighter shuddering under the onslaught of enemy fire. The bombers were taking a pounding, their hulls scorched and pitted by the relentless barrage from the planet's surface. Suddenly, a searing beam of energy lanced up from the ground, spearing a bomber straight through the cockpit. The stricken craft exploded in a ball of flame, showering the formation with debris. More beams followed, the massive defense cannons tracking and firing with ruthless precision. "We can't take much more of this," Maverick yelled over the comm, his voice ragged. "Those guns will rip us to shreds." Robert's mind raced, desperately seeking a solution. They had to neutralize those cannons or the entire attack would fail. And then it hit him, a plan so reckless, so audacious, that it just might work. "Maverick, take command of the squadron," he ordered. "Keep those bombers covered, no matter what." "What are you going to do?" Maverick asked, fear and confusion warring in his tone. "I'm going to take out those guns." Robert switched to the squadron-wide channel. "Rogue 1 to Rogue 5, form up on me. We're going in." 4 fighters peeled away from the main group, falling into formation behind Robert's Phantom. They were his most skilled pilots, veterans of a dozen campaigns. They'd follow him into hell itself if he asked. Robert checked his torpedoes, his jaw clenching. "Rogue Squadron, we're making a run on those defense cannons. Stay low and fast, use the terrain for cover, watch your spacing and don't get target fixated. We'll only get one shot at this." Affirmatives rang out as the pilots steeled themselves for the attack. Robert took a deep breath, his grip tightening on the stick. "Let's go." The 5 Phantoms dove towards the planet's surface, engines screaming as they plummeted through the atmosphere. Instantly, the defense cannons swiveled to track them, energy beams sizzling through the air. Robert jinked and rolled, the G-forces slamming him back in his seat. A beam flashed past his cockpit, so close he could feel the heat through his flight suit. Rogue 3 wasn't so lucky. A direct hit vaporized his fighter, leaving nothing but a puff of ionized gas. "Stay with me!" Robert shouted, blinking sweat from his eyes. They leveled off just above the rocky landscape, weaving through canyons and skimming over ridgelines. The cannons fired relentlessly, blasting huge chunks of stone from the cliff faces around them. Rogue 5 caught a glancing blow, his stabilizers shredded by the searing energy. He fought to keep his crippled fighter aloft, but it was a losing battle. With a final, defiant yell, he rammed his Phantom into one of the cannon emplacements, the resulting explosion consuming them both. Robert felt a stab of anguish, but there was no time to mourn. The remaining cannons loomed ahead, their barrels glowing with hellish light as they prepared to fire. "Arm torpedoes," he barked. "Target the power couplings at the base of the turrets." The Phantom screamed in, juking and spinning to throw off the cannon's aim. The air crackled with energy as beams crisscrossed around them, the heat and light almost unbearable. Robert centered his targeting reticle on the pulsing weak point of the nearest gun and squeezed the trigger. A proton torpedo leapt from his fighter's underbelly, streaking towards the massive cannon. His wingmen followed suit, their own missiles lancing out to strike the other turrets. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still. Then the world erupted in fire. The torpedoes struck home, the couplings exploding in blinding flashes of light. The guns toppled like felled trees, secondary detonations ripping through their housings as they collapsed in on themselves. Robert let out a victorious whoop, but his elation was short-lived. Even as the last cannon fell, a barrage of anti-aircraft fire converged on his Phantom. Alarms blared as his shields failed, his hull taking hit after punishing hit. His engines flamed out, the cockpit filling with choking smoke. He fought with the stick trying to keep the nose up, but it was no use. The ground rushed up to meet him, the rocky landscape filling his canopy. In a last desperate act, Robert reached for the ejection handle. The canopy blew away and his seat rocketed out of the dying fighter, the sudden acceleration slamming him back like a giant fist. He caught a glimpse of his Phantom smashing itself to pieces on the unforgiving ground, before his parachute snapped open, jerking him upright in the harness. As he drifted down, the wind buffeting him like a leaf in a gale, Robert saw the Federation bombers soaring overhead. Their bomb bay doors yawned open, ordnance tumbling from their bellies to rain destruction on the Evora installations below. The shipyards and factories disappeared in a boiling sea of flame, the shock waves battering Robert even through his flight suit. His vision grayed out as the overpressure slammed into him, the roar of the explosions fading to a distant ringing in his ears. And then there was nothing but darkness and silence. Robert came to with a groan, every nerve in his body screaming in pain. He blinked gummy eyes, trying to focus on his surroundings. He was lying in the bottom of a rocky crater, the wreckage of his ejection seat smoldering nearby. Gingerly, he pushed himself to a sitting position, wincing as his battered muscles protested. His flight suit was torn and scorched, his helmet visor starred by cracks. But he was alive. He keyed his comm, hoping against hope that it still worked. "Raise a lead to any friendly forces, do you read? I'm down on the surface. Need immediate extraction." Static hissed in his ears, the signal weak and broken. But then, faintly, he heard Maverick's voice. "Robert, is that you? Thank God, we thought we'd lost you." Robert let out a shuddering breath, relief flooding through him. "Still kicking, Mav. Did we get the bastards?" "Affirmative," Maverick replied, his grin audible even over the crackling connection. "Zathras Prime is a smoking ruin. The Evora are in full retreat. We gave 'em a bloody nose they won't soon forget." Robert closed his eyes, a fierce, savage joy burning in his heart. They'd done it. They'd struck a blow against the monsters who'd murdered his brother, made them pay in blood and fire. But he knew this was only the beginning. The Evora would be back, hungering for revenge, and he would be there to meet them, to make them rue the day they ever dared to cross swords with humanity. For he was a hellraiser, a warrior born and bred, and he would not rest until every last one of those scaly bastards was dead or driven back to the fetid hole they'd crawled out of. This, he swore, on his brother's memory and the blood of every human they'd slain. No matter the cost, no matter the odds, he would fight on, for the Federation, for Terra, for Tom. Robert groaned as he pulled himself from the wreckage of his ejector seat, every muscle screaming in protest. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, and took stock of his surroundings. His fighter was a twisted heap of metal, smoke rising from its ruined engines. The landscape around him was a blasted hellscape, the once proud Evora factories reduced to rubble by the Federation's bombing run. He staggered to his feet, wincing as pain lanced through his ribs. His flight suit was torn and scorched, his helmet cracked down the center. He reached for his comms, hoping to raise Maverick or any of the other Hellraisers, but was met with only static. The signal was being jammed. He was on his own, deep behind enemy lines. As he scanned the horizon, movement caught his eye, a group of figures trudging through the debris field. At first he tensed, thinking they were Evora soldiers, but as they drew closer, he saw the truth. They were human, ragged, filthy, but unmistakably human. His heart leapt as he recognized one of them, Corporal Jake Tex Connor, his brother Tom's best friend. He'd been on the GFS Dauntless when it was attacked. Robert rushed forward, ignoring the pain in his body. "Tex!" he called out, his voice hoarse. "Tex, is that you?" The group turned, their eyes widening in surprise. Tex broke into a run, closing the distance between them. He clasped Robert's hand, his grip strong despite his haggard appearance. "Rob, holy shit, am I glad to see you. We thought we were the only humans left on this rock." Robert looked over the other survivors, taking in their tattered uniforms and haunted eyes. "What happened? How did you get here?" Tex's face darkened. "The Evora. They took us prisoner after they hit the Dauntless, brought us to some kind of base not far from here. We managed to bust out during the chaos of your bombing run." He patted the strange-looking rifle slung over his shoulder. "We grabbed some of their weapons on the way out. Figured we might need 'em." Robert nodded, his mind racing. If these men had escaped from an Evora base, then there might be more survivors out there. More importantly, there might be intel they could use against the enemy. He squared his shoulders, pushing aside his pain and fatigue. "All right, listen up. We need to get off this planet, but we can't do it alone. Our best chance is to work together, pool our resources and knowledge." The men looked to him, their eyes hungry for leadership, for purpose. Robert met their gazes, his voice steady and sure. "I'll take point. Tex, you're my second. We move fast and quiet, avoid any Evora patrols. We'll scavenge what we can from their outposts, gather intel where possible. Our priority is survival. But if we can strike a blow against these bastards on the way out, all the better." A ragged cheer went up from the group, a flicker of hope kindling in their beaten souls. Robert felt a surge of pride, of purpose. He would lead these men to safety, or die trying, for the Federation, for Tom. As they set out across the war-ravaged landscape, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was just beginning. The Evora had already shown the depths of their cruelty, their disregard for human life. What other horrors might they have in store? He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand, one step at a time, one breath at a time. Survive, resist, prevail. The ragtag band of survivors moved cautiously through the blasted ruins, scavenging what they could from abandoned Evora outposts. Rations, medical supplies, ammo, anything that might aid in their escape. They had to be careful. Evora patrols still roamed the area, hunting for stragglers. Robert led from the front, his senses razor-sharp, his stolen Evora pulse rifle always at the ready. Tex was never far from his side, watching their six with a dogged dedication. The two men had fallen into an easy partnership, born of shared loss and a thirst for vengeance. As they penetrated deeper into enemy territory, they began to notice a disturbing pattern. The Evora bases they encountered weren't just military outposts. Many of them housed strange laboratories and research facilities, overflowing with advanced tech, unlike anything the Federation had ever seen. In one such lab they made a chilling discovery: schematics and test data for a new kind of weapon, one capable of annihilating entire planets. A planet killer. Robert felt a cold knot of dread in his gut as he pored over the stolen data. If the Evora perfected this technology, it would mean the end of the Federation, the end of humanity itself. He called the survivors together, his face grim. "Listen up. I know we're all exhausted, all eager to get the hell off this rock, but we have a chance here, a chance to strike a blow against the Evora that could change the course of the war." He held up the schematics, his eyes hard. "They're building a planet killer, a weapon that could wipe out entire worlds. We can't let that happen." Tex stepped forward, his eyebrows furrowing. "What are you suggesting, Rob?" Robert took a deep breath. "Their main research facility is here, not far from our current position. If we can infiltrate it, sabotage the weapon before it's completed." He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. It was a suicide mission, and they all knew it. But what choice did they have? One by one, the survivors nodded, a grim tenacity settling over them. They knew the stakes, knew the odds, but they were soldiers, warriors. They would fight to their last breath if it meant saving their people. Robert felt a surge of pride, of love for these battered, unbroken men, his brothers in arms. "All right then, let's gear up, get what rest we can. Tomorrow we strike at the heart of the enemy, for the Federation, for Earth, for every human soul those bastards have taken." As the men dispersed to make their preparations, Robert caught Tex's eye. The two men clasped forearms, a wordless acknowledgement passing between them. Come what may, they would see this through, for Tom, for vengeance, for the future of their species. The facility loomed before them, a monstrosity of black metal and pulsing green light. Evora guards patrolled the perimeter, their reptilian eyes cold and watchful. Automated defense turrets swiveled on their mounts, ready to shred any intruder foolish enough to approach. Robert and his team crouched in the shadows, studying the enemy's movements, looking for any weakness in their defenses. They had spent the past days scouting the facility, gathering what intel they could. Now, as the twin moons of Zathras Prime rose over the horizon, they prepared to strike. Robert signaled to Tex, who nodded grimly. The two men had devised a plan, risky but audacious. A frontal assault would be suicide. Instead, they would infiltrate the facility through its waste disposal system, a network of tunnels and sewers that snaked beneath the complex. It was a dangerous gambit. The tunnels would be cramped, claustrophobic, with little room to maneuver. If they were discovered, there would be nowhere to run. But it was their best chance, their only chance. Robert led the way, dropping into the fetid darkness of the tunnel mouth. The stench was overwhelming, a miasma of decay and chemicals that made his eyes water and his gorge rise. He swallowed hard, forcing down his nausea, and pressed on. Behind him the others followed, their faces pale but determined in the sickly light of their chemsticks. They moved in silence, the only sound the soft splash of their footsteps in the muck. At each junction, Robert consulted the stolen schematics, guiding them ever deeper into the bowels of the facility. The air grew hotter, more oppressive as they descended. Rivulets of sweat ran down their backs, soaking their stolen Evora armor. Finally, they reached their target, a maintenance hatch that led up into the heart of the research labs. Robert paused, his hand on the rusted ladder, and turned to face his team. "This is it," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "From here we split up. Tex and I will head for the main lab, plant the charges. The rest of you find the control room, disable any security systems you can." He met each of their gazes in turn, seeing the fear, the grit, the steadfast perseverance. "If things go south, if we get separated, just get the hell out. Don't wait for us. Don't come back. Understand?" Nods all around, a silent pact sealed in the fetid darkness. Robert turned back to the ladder, his grip tightening on the rungs. "All right then, see you on the other side." He climbed, Tex close behind, the metal cold and slick beneath his hands. The hatch opened with a soft hiss, revealing a sterile white corridor beyond, the belly of the beast. Robert stepped out, pulse rifle at the ready, every nerve thrumming with tension. Beside him, Tex scanned the hallway, his eyes hard and alert. "The lab should be this way," Robert whispered, consulting the schematics one last time. "Let's move." They crept forward, hugging the walls, ears straining for any sound of alarm. The facility was strangely quiet, the only noise the hum of distant machinery and the soft thud of their own heartbeats. Too quiet, Robert thought, a prickle of unease running down his spine. Where were the guards, the scientists? Why did it feel like they were walking into her trap? The thought hit him a split second before the ambush, but by then it was too late. Doors slammed open on either side of the corridor, disgorging dozens of Ivora soldiers. They poured into the hallway, pulse rifles raised, their reptilian faces twisted in snarls of triumph. "Drop your weapons, human filth," one of them hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "You are surrounded, outnumbered. Surrender, and your deaths will be swift." Robert and Tex exchanged a glance, a wordless conversation in the space of a heartbeat. Surrender was never an option, not for them. They had known from the moment they set foot in this cursed place that they might not make it out alive, had accepted that price for the sake of their mission, their people. As one, they raised their rifles, fingers tightening on the triggers. The Ivora tensed, ready to gun them down. Robert felt a strange calm settle over him, a clarity of purpose that banished all fear, all doubt. This was his moment, his destiny, to strike one last blow against the monsters who had taken everything from him. He smiled, a feral baring of teeth, and uttered the words that would be his epitaph, his battle cry. "Go to hell, you scaly bastards!" And then the world erupted in fire and blood. Robert and the survivors crept through the war-ravaged landscape, their stolen Ivora armor blending into the shadows. The research facility loomed ahead, a monolith of black metal and pulsing green light. Robert's heart pounded as they drew closer, the weight of their mission heavy on his shoulders. Suddenly a figure stepped out from behind a twisted hunk of debris. Robert raised his rifle ready to fire, but hesitated as he saw the figure's hands raised in a gesture of surrender. It was an Ivora, but unlike any Robert had ever seen, its scales were a dull grey, its eyes haunted and weary. "Don't shoot," the Ivora said, its voice raspy and tinged with desperation. "I am not your enemy." Robert kept his rifle trained on the alien, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't blast you right here." The Ivora slowly lowered its hands, its gaze never leaving Robert's. "My name is Pixis. I am a scientist, and I know how to destroy the weapon they are building here." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Why should we trust you?" Pixis let out a hissing sigh, its shoulders slumping. "I was the lead researcher on the Planet Killer project, but I could no longer stand by and watch my creation be used to slaughter innocent worlds. I want to help you stop it." Robert exchanged a glance with Tex, seeing the same skepticism and mistrust in his friend's eyes. But they both knew they had no choice. If Pixis was telling the truth, he could be their only hope of success. "All right," Robert said, lowering his rifle. "But if you betray us, I'll make sure you regret it." Pixis nodded, a glimmer of hope in its eyes. "I understand. Now listen closely. There is a network of tunnels beneath the facility used for waste disposal. We can use them to infiltrate the building undetected." Robert and Pixis huddled over a makeshift map, their heads bent together as they planned their attack. With Pixis's inside knowledge, they devised a two-pronged assault. Robert and Pixis would head for the main control room to initiate the self-destruct sequence, while Tex led the rest of the survivors to secure a means of escape from the facility's hangar bay. As they prepared to split up, Tex clapped Robert on the shoulder, his face grim. "You sure about this, Rob? Trusting a damn Ivora?" Robert met his friend's gaze, his fists tightening. "We don't have a choice, Tex. It's this or we fail. And failure's not an option." Tex nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Give 'em hell, buddy. I'll see you on the other side." Robert and Pixis descended into the tunnels, the stench of decay and chemicals assaulting their nostrils. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing off the damp walls. Pixis led the way, navigating the labyrinthine passages with a surety born of familiarity. As they neared the heart of the facility, the tunnels began to slope upwards, the air growing warmer and more stifling. Pixis paused at a nondescript hatch, his fingers flying over the keypad. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a sterile white corridor beyond. Robert followed Pixis into the facility, his senses on high alert. They crept through the halls, ducking into alcoves and side rooms to avoid patrolling guards and security drones. Pixis seemed to know every inch of the building, guiding them ever closer to their target. Finally, they reached the control room, a cavernous space dominated by a massive viewport, and there, hovering beyond the reinforced glass, was the planet killer. Robert's breath caught in his throat as he beheld the weapon, a monstrous construct of jagged metal and pulsing energy. Its core glowed with a sickly green light, tendrils of power arcing across its surface. It was like looking into the face of death itself. Pixis rushed to the control panels, his fingers a blur as he worked to initiate the self-destruct sequence. Robert stood guard, his rifle at the ready, every muscle tensed for action. Suddenly alarms began to blare throughout the facility, red lights flashing in warning. Over the comms, Tex's voice crackled with static. "Rob, we've got the ship, but we're taking heavy fire. We can't hold them off much longer." Robert looked to Pixis, saw the desperation in the Evora's eyes as he struggled with the alien controls. They were out of time. With a sinking feeling in his gut, Robert made the call. "Tex, get out of here now, don't wait for us." "But Rob..." "That's an order, soldier, go." Robert cut the comm, his heart heavy as he turned to Pixis. The Evora met his gaze, a look of grim understanding passing between them. They both knew what had to be done. As the sound of boots echoed down the corridor, drawing ever closer, Robert and Pixis took up positions on either side of the door. They exchanged a nod, a final moment of solidarity between two unlikely allies. Then the door burst open, and the Evora warriors poured into the room, their eyes blazing with hate and fury. Robert and Pixis opened fire, their weapons spitting death into the oncoming horde. They fought with a desperate ferocity, the air thick with the stench of blood and ozone. Evora warriors fell by the dozens, but still they came, a relentless tide of claws and teeth and armor. Robert felt a white-hot lance of pain as a plasma bolt seared through his shoulder, spinning him around. He gritted his teeth and kept fighting, his vision blurring at the edges. Beside him, Pixis took a hit to the chest, a spray of dark blood splattering the wall behind him. The Evora scientist staggered but did not fall, his rifle still barking defiance. Robert's weapon clicked empty, and he knew they were finished. He looked to Pixis, saw the resignation in the alien's eyes. They had done all they could. The rest was up to fate. As the Evora closed in, their blades glinting in the harsh light, Robert let his rifle fall from his hands. He thought of Tom, of the Hellraisers, of all the lives he had fought to protect. And he smiled, a fierce, defiant grin that promised the Evora a hell of a fight before the end. "Come on then, you bastards," he growled, his fists clenched tight. "Let's dance." In the control room, the air crackled with energy as Robert and Pixis fought back to back, pulse rifles blazing. The Evora soldiers poured in from every entrance, their reptilian eyes gleaming with malice. Robert ducked behind a console as a barrage of plasma bolts sizzled overhead. He popped up, squeezing off a burst that dropped two Evora in a spray of green blood. Pixis was a whirlwind of motion, his rifle spitting death with unerring precision. He seemed to anticipate the Evora's every move, dodging and weaving through their fire like a ghost. "These bastards just keep coming!" Robert shouted over the din of battle. "We have to hold them off until the self-destruct sequence is complete," Pixis yelled back, slamming a fresh power cell into his rifle. The room shuddered as a deep, ominous rumble echoed through the facility. Cracks raced along the walls, the metal groaning under the strain. Robert lobbed a plasma grenade into a cluster of Evora, the explosive detonating in a blinding flash. Charred body parts flew in all directions. "How much longer?" he asked, his voice ragged with exhaustion. Pixis glanced at the countdown on the main display. 2 minutes! The Evora pressed their attack, heedless of their losses. For every one that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. Robert's rifle clicked empty. He snatched up a fallen Evora's sidearm and kept firing, the alien weapon growing hot in his grip. The room bucked and heaved, throwing them off balance. A support beam crashed down, crushing an Evora soldier beneath its weight. "We can't stay here," Pixis shouted. "The whole place is coming down." Robert nodded, his face grim. "Hangar Bay, it's our only chance." They fought their way to the exit, stepping over the bodies of the fallen. The corridors were filled with smoke and debris, emergency lights flickering wildly. A jet of superheated plasma burst from a ruptured conduit, nearly taking Robert's head off. He rolled aside, feeling the searing heat blister his skin. They rounded a corner, the hangar bay doors in sight, and there, blocking their path, stood a towering figure in black armor, a crackling energy hammer in its grip. The Evora commander's eyes burned with hatred as it regarded Robert. "Human," it growled, its voice like grinding stone. "You have caused much destruction this day." Robert raised his sidearm, but the commander knocked it away with a contemptuous swipe of its hammer. "You will face me in single combat," the Evora snarled. "I will claim the honor of ending your miserable life." Robert glanced at Pixis, saw the fear and desperation in the alien's eyes. He knew what he had to do. "Get to the fighter," he said quietly. "I'll hold him off." Pixis hesitated, then clasped Robert's shoulder. "It has been an honor, my friend." Robert nodded, then turned to face the commander, his fists clenched. The Evora lunged, its hammer whistling through the air. Robert ducked and weaved, using his speed to stay ahead of the commander's brutal swings. But he was tired, battered, and the Evora was relentless. The hammer clipped his shoulder, sending him spinning. Pain lanced through his body, hot and sharp. The commander pressed its advantage, raining down blows that Robert barely managed to avoid. The floor shook beneath their feet, the facility tearing itself apart. In a last audacious attempt, Robert charged forward, tackling the commander around the waist. They crashed through the guardrail, plummeting into the abyss below. Pixis watched in horror as they vanished from sight, swallowed by the depths. The countdown reached 0 and the world went white. The planet killer detonated, its destructive energy ripping through the base. Pixis, strapped into the Evora fighter, was slammed back in his seat as the shock wave hit. He fought with the controls, the craft bucking and shuddering as it clawed for altitude. The research facility collapsed in on itself, a roiling fireball consuming everything in its path. Pixis broke free of the atmosphere, the blackness of space enveloping him. He looked back at Zathras Prime, now a seething cauldron of flame and debris. Tears welled in his eyes as he thought of Robert, of the sacrifice he had made. The human had given everything to stop the Evora, to save countless lives. He would be remembered, Pixis vowed. His story would be told, his name honored for generations to come. The galaxy would know of the hero who had stood against the darkness, who had given his life so that others might live. Robert Allen, the soldier who had shown an alien the true meaning of courage, of friendship, the man who had changed the course of history with his unwavering spirit and unconquerable determination. Pixis set a course for the nearest Federation outpost, his heart heavy but his tenacity unshakable. The fight was not over. The Evora would be back, their thirst for conquest unquenched. But they would be met by the united races of the galaxy, by beings who had been inspired by the selfless deeds of one brave human. Robert's legacy would live on, a shining beacon of hope in the face of overwhelming odds, and Pixis would ensure that it would never be forgotten. Pixis's fighter streaked through the void, the remnants of Zathras Prime's research facility blooming into a fiery cataclysm behind him. The shockwave buffeted his ship, alarms blaring as the shields strained to hold back the roiling wave of destruction. In the cockpit, Pixis gripped the controls with trembling hands, his heart heavy with the weight of Robert's sacrifice. The human had given everything to stop the Evora's planet killer, had fought with a courage and selflessness that defied belief. As the fighter cleared the blast radius, Pixis keyed his comms, hailing the Federation fleet on an open channel. "This is Pixis of the Evora Resistance. The planet killer has been destroyed. Repeat, the planet killer has been destroyed, but the cost was high. Lieutenant Robert Allen, he didn't make it." There was a moment of stunned silence over the comms, broken only by the hiss of static. Then a voice crackled through, thick with emotion. "This is Admiral Petrov of the GFS Indomitable. Pixis, are you certain? Is there any chance?" Pixis closed his eyes. The image of Robert's final, desperate charge seared into his memory. "No, Admiral, he went down fighting, taking the Evora commander with him. He saved us all." In the days that followed, the news of the planet killer's destruction spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The Evora, reeling from the loss of their secret weapon and the devastation of their main research facility, found their advance grinding to a halt. Their soldiers, once fanatical in their devotion to conquest, now wavered in the face of human tenacity and courage. Pixis, having seen firsthand the bravery and selflessness of the humans, became a tireless advocate for peace. He met with Federation diplomats and Evora leaders alike, using his knowledge of his people's culture and politics to bridge the gap between the two sides. "The humans are not our enemies," he told the Evora High Council, his voice ringing with conviction. "They are a species of honor and valor, willing to lay down their lives for the greater good. We must end this senseless conflict before more lives are lost on both sides." Slowly, painfully, the two sides came together, negotiating a ceasefire and eventually a tentative truce. The guns fell silent, the ships of war drifting back to their respective homeworlds. On Earth, the survivors of the Hellraisers returned to a hero's welcome. They marched through the streets of New York, Paris, and Tokyo, their faces etched with the scars of battle and the weight of their fallen comrades. At a solemn memorial service, dignitaries from across the Federation and beyond gathered to pay their respects. Maverick, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, took the podium to speak of his friend and leader. "Robert Allen was the best of us," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "He fought for what he believed in, for the people he loved, for the very soul of the Federation. Maverick paused, swallowing hard. "He was my brother in every way that mattered, and I will miss him every day for the rest of my life." As Maverick stepped down from the podium, a ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. A lone figure was approaching, clad in the simple robes of an Evora peacekeeper. It was Pixis, his scaly features etched with sorrow and respect. The Evora rebel bowed deeply before the assembled mourners, his voice heavy with emotion. "I come to pay my respects to the warriors who fought so bravely, so selflessly to protect the innocent. Your Lieutenant Allen, he saved my life, and the lives of countless others. His sacrifice will never be forgotten." Pixis raised his head, meeting Maverick's gaze with eyes that glistened with tears. He was a true hero in every sense of the word, and I am honored to have known him, however briefly. As Pixis stepped back, a hush fell over the crowd. Then from the back of the assembly a lone figure emerged, limping slightly, his face obscured by a hooded cloak. Maverick's eyes widened, his heart pounding in his chest. It couldn't be, could it? The figure reached up, pushing back his hood to reveal a face battered and scarred, but unmistakably alive. A face that Maverick knew as well as his own. "Rob," he whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief and joy. Is it really you?" Robert smiled, a smile that lit up his bruised and weary features like a sunrise. "Yeah, Mav, it's me. I made it." The crowd erupted into cheers and applause as Maverick rushed forward, enveloping his friend in a crushing embrace. Tears streamed down his face as he held on tight, hardly daring to believe that this was real. "How?" he managed to choke out, pulling back to look Robert in the eye. We thought you were dead." Robert's smile turned wry, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "You know me, Mav, too stubborn to die." He sobered, his gaze turning distant as he remembered. When I fell, I thought for sure that was it, but I got lucky. A group of Evora rebels found me, pulled me out of the wreckage. They'd been working against their own government, trying to bring an end to the war. They patched me up, helped me get back to Federation space. Robert looked out over the crowd, his eyes shining with pride and drive. But the fight's not over yet. We've got a lot of work to do, to build a lasting peace between our peoples, and I aim to see it through no matter what. As the Hellraisers gathered around their returned leader, their faces alight with joy and relief, Pixis watched from a distance, a small smile playing across his reptilian features. The road ahead would be lengthy and challenging, he knew. The scars of war ran deep, the mistrust and hatred between their species not easily forgotten. But with warriors like Robert and his squadron leading the way, Pixis had hope. Hope for a future where human and Evora could stand side by side, not as enemies but as allies, as friends. A future worth fighting for. Years had passed since the war with the Evora, and a fragile peace reigned across the galaxy. Robert Allen, now a seasoned diplomat, worked tirelessly alongside his Evora counterpart and close friend, Pixis, to maintain the delicate balance between their two species. The scars of war had faded, but the memories of sacrifice and loss still burdened immensely on Robert's mind. He and Pixis had fought side by side, forging an unbreakable bond through the crucible of combat. Now they used their hard-won understanding to bridge the gap between human and Evora, fostering a new era of cooperation and mutual respect. But even as they worked for peace, trouble stirred on the horizon. Reports began to filter in of brutal attacks on Federation outposts and colonies, the perpetrators leaving a trail of death and destruction in their wake. The attackers were Evora, but not the Evora that Robert and Pixis had come to know. These were hardliners, fanatics who refused to accept the treaty and sought to reignite the flames of war. Their leader was a ruthless warlord named Zaxus, a veteran of the war who had never laid down his arms. He saw the peace as a betrayal of the Evora's warrior spirit, a cowardly surrender to the weak and inferior humans. He and his followers, the Crimson Claws, were determined to shatter the fragile truce and plunge the galaxy back into the chaos of total war. Robert and Pixis were called before the Federation Council, the weight of the situation etched on the faces of the assembled leaders. Admiral Petrov, Robert's former commanding officer, stood at the head of the table, his expression grim. "Lieutenant Allen, Ambassador Pixis," Petrov began, his voice heavy with urgency. "We have a crisis on our hands. These Crimson Claws are a clear and present danger to the peace we've worked so hard to achieve." He tapped a button on the table, bringing up a holographic display of a ravaged colony, the buildings reduced to smoking ruins. "They've hit a dozen settlements in the past month alone, leaving no survivors. We need to put a stop to this, and fast." Robert leaned forward, his eyes hard. "What do you need us to do, Admiral?" Petrov fixed him with a steady gaze. "We need you to hunt them down, Lieutenant. You and Ambassador Pixis have a unique understanding of both our peoples. If anyone can track these bastards and bring them to justice, it's you." Pixis nodded, his reptilian features set in a determined scowl. "We will not let Zaxus and his fanatics undo everything we have built. The Crimson Claws will be brought to account for their crimes." Robert felt a familiar fire kindling in his veins, the old thrill of purpose and righteous anger. He had hoped that his days of fighting were behind him, but he knew that he could never stand idly by while innocents suffered. He met Pixis's gaze, a wordless understanding passing between them. They had shed blood together, had seen the horrors of war firsthand. They would not let it happen again. "We'll find them, Admiral," Robert said, his voice ringing with conviction, "and we'll make sure they never threaten the peace again." As they left the council chamber, Robert couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. The Crimson Claws were a threat, yes, but something about this felt wrong. The attacks were too precise, too well coordinated for a ragtag band of renegades. He voiced his concerns to Pixis as they boarded their ship, a sleek Federation cruiser outfitted for diplomatic missions. The Evora frowned, his brow ridges furrowing in thought. "You're right," he said, his voice low and troubled. "There's more to this than meets the eye. Xaxus is a brute, but he's no fool. He wouldn't be able to pull off something like this on his own." Robert nodded grimly, a cold certainty settling in his gut. "Someone's pulling the strings here, Pixis. Someone with a lot of resources and a vested interest in seeing this piece fail." He punched in the coordinates for their first lead, a seedy spaceport on the edge of Evora territory. "Looks like we've got our work cut out for us, old friend." Pixis clasped his shoulder, his grip strong and reassuring. "Together, Robert, as always." The ship leapt into hyperspace, carrying them towards an uncertain future. But whatever challenges lay ahead, Robert knew that he would face them with Pixis by his side, just as they had faced the horrors of war all those years ago. For the sake of the peace they had fought so hard to win, they would not fail. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.